The recycled air aboard ASF vigilant tastes of copper, stale coffee, and the faint, lingering tang of ozone that never quite scrubs out of the ventilation system, no matter how many filter cycles the engineering team runs. It is a taste Commander Alara Voss has come to associate with the abyssal rift, the 1,200 light-year swath of lightless deep space between the rimward colonies and the uncharted dark beyond, where not a single star shines bright enough to register on the naked eye, where the only illumination comes from the soft glow of console displays, the red strobe of emergency strips, and the faint, pulsing blue of the ship's singularity core bleeding through the polarized viewport. It has been 72 hours since Vigilance slipped out of the last ASF outpost at Rimward Gate, 12 years since the battle of the Rimward Rift that pushed the Krell Armada back beyond the rift's edge, 10 years since Alara watched the destroyer USS Resolute, carrying her younger sister Leela, vanish in a burst of Krell plasma fire during a skirmish 4 light-years from New Avalon. The bridge is quiet, save for the low thrum of the reactor, the soft clack of Jax Marlowe's knuckles as he taps a rhythm against the arm of his XO's chair, and the faint hum of Kale Wren's sensor console as the 22-year-old Academy grad runs his 4th sweep of the sector in as many hours. Jax's scar, 3 inches of raised, pale tissue running from the left corner of his mouth to his jawline, carved there by a Krell warrior's claw during the Rift battle, throbs dully when he's bored, a quirk he refuses to admit to, though Alara has learned to read it after 3 years serving together. Kale's data pad, propped against the edge of his console, bears a sticker of the Horsehead Nebula, a gift from his 7-year-old sister who drew it herself, the edges frayed from him rubbing it when he's nervous. Nothing but micrometeoroids and the occasional hydrogen atom ping, Commander, Kale says, not looking up from his display, his voice tight with the frustration of 3 days of empty sweeps. Command's intel was wrong. There are no Krell stragglers out here. The raid on New Avalon was a one-off. They're not operating this far out. Alara doesn't answer right away, her fingers brushing the worn edge of the photo tucked into the slot of her command chair. Her and Leela, 16 and 12, standing in front of their parents' wheat farm on New Illinois, Leela grinning so wide her dimples show, a bruise already fading on her cheek from falling off the tractor that morning. She de-carried that photo through every patrol, every battle, every night she spent staring at the ceiling of her quarters wondering if Leela was dead or captured, until the day ASF intelligence confirmed Resolute had gone down with all hands, the Krell having overridden the escape pods before finishing the ship off. She stopped sleeping through the night after that, and the photo has been tucked into her command chair slot ever since. Run it again, she says finally. Widen the sweep radius to 0.5 light-years. If the Krell sent a scout picket ahead of the main fleet, they'll be running silent, no active emissions, no comms traffic. They'll hide in the dust. Kale sighs but adjusts his settings, and the sensor console hums louder for a minute before he goes quiet. For 12 minutes, the only sound is the reactor thrum, then Kale's head snaps up, his eyes wide. Commander, you need to see this. Alara pushes off her chair, crossing the bridge in 3 quick strides to stand behind him, Jax right on her heels. On Kale's display, a tiny blip, no larger than a pixel, flickered for 0.2 seconds before vanishing. What was that? Don't know, Kale says, his fingers flying across the console, pulling up the raw sensor data. Passive gravimetric ping, mass estimate 200 metric tons, signature doesn't match any ASF or Krell craft in our database. Popped up out of nowhere, then dropped off the sensors completely. I thought it was a cosmic ray hit at first, but the gravimetric signature is too strong. Log it, Alara says, her jaw tight. Tag it as unconfirmed anomaly, timestamp 04/17/22 ship time. Run a background scan of the sector for the last 72 hours, see if there are any other blips we missed. Kale nods and pulls up the long-range scan, scrolling through hours of flat, empty data, until another blip pops up, this one a little larger, 400 metric tons, lasting 0.4 seconds, 17 minutes after the first one. Then another 800 metric tons, 0.6 seconds, 22 minutes after that. Each one is stronger, lasts longer, and is 12 degrees off from the previous one, a slow, deliberate arc angling towards the Vigilant's current position. That's not random, Jack says, his hand resting on the butt of the sidearm holstered at his hip, the scar on his jaw throbbing visibly now. That's a pattern. Someone's moving in. Before Alara can respond, the comms console crackles to life, spitting out a burst of static so loud Kale winces, followed by a repeating, digitized growl, the sharp, guttural cadence of Krell's speech. The bridge goes silent, every head turning to the comms officer, Lieutenant Mia Torres, her face pale, her fingers flying across her console to decode the signal. "It's Krell," she says, her voice tight. "Encrypted, but I can break the outer layer. It's a distress call." A cold prickle runs down Alara's spine. Krell do not send distress calls. Their hive mind protocol demands every warrior fight to the death, every ship detonate its core before it can be captured, every piece of data wiped before it falls into enemy hands. She's never heard of a Krell distress call in 12 years of war. "Decode it," she orders. Torres works for 10 seconds, then freezes, her eyes wide. "Commander, it's repeating the same 12-second loop over and over. No randomization, no changing codes. It's the Krell universal distress frequency, but it's a recording, and it's coming from 1.2 light-years out bearing 237 Mark IV. Jax lets out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "A trap. Old Krell trick, broadcast a distress call to lure us in, ambush us when we get close. We should turn around, report back to command, let them send a fleet out here to check it out." Alara shakes her head, her gaze fixed on the sensor display, where the blips are now coming every 10 minutes, each one stronger, closer. If it's a trap, the ambush party would be hiding within 100,000 clicks of the signal source. Our passive sensors would have picked them up by now, and Krell don't repeat signals. Their encryption is randomized every 0.3 seconds to prevent jamming. This is a fixed loop. She turns to Kale. "Triangulate the signal again, confirm the source, and run a gravimetric sweep of the sector, focus on the signal origin." Kale nods, his fingers flying across the console, and 30 seconds later he goes rigid. "Commander, gravimetric sweep just picked up a mass signature at the signal origin. 14 million metric tons. Exact match for the Krell Dreadnought Hive Sire." Alara's breath catches. The Hive Sire was the Krell's first prototype Singularity Core Dreadnought, the largest ship in their armada, the flagship of the invasion force, until it vanished during the Battle of the Rimward Rift 12 years prior. The official ASF after-action report said it had been hit by 3 fusion mines, its hull breached, its Singularity Core destabilized, vaporizing the entire ship and its crew of 2,000 Krell warriors. No wreckage had ever been found, no mass signature detected. It was written off as destroyed, a turning point in the war that had broken the Krell's advance. "That's impossible," Jax says, though his voice is tight, his hand tightening on his sidearm. "The Hive Sire's core was supposed to collapse when the hull was breached. There's no way it survived." "Pull up the Hive Sire's battle specs," Alara orders, her voice steady even as her heart pounds in her chest. Kale pulls up the file, and the data matches exactly. 14 million metric tons, Singularity Core output rated at 2.3 petawatts, hull composed of Krell Durasteel alloy layered with organic chitin, unique to the Hive Sire's prototype build. There is no other ship in the Krell fleet with that mass, that core output, that hull composition. "The core didn't collapse," Alara says, the realization settling in her chest like lead. "It's stabilized. Somehow." For the next 4 hours, the bridge is a hive of quiet tension, every crew member on edge, watching the sensor displays as the blips grow more frequent, now coming every 45 minutes, each one accompanied by a new signal, a low, thrumming pulse, so low it's almost below the threshold of human hearing, but strong enough to make the deck plates vibrate faintly under their feet. Kale runs it against the Krell biosignature database, and his face goes ashen. "That pulse," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a Krell Queen's biorhythm, exact match for the biosignature recorded from the Hive Sire's queen during the Rift battle. She's still alive." Alara feels the blood drain from her face. Krell Queens are the heart of the hive mind, controlling every warrior, every ship, every operation across the entire Armada. If the Hive Sire's queen is still alive, that means the ship is still operational, still connected to the hive mind, or worse, operating independently, a rogue dreadnought with no loyalty to the Armada, no rules of engagement, no reason to spare human lives. "We can't stay here," Jack says, his voice rough. "If that thing is operational, it can pick us off before we even know it's there. We need to turn around, jump back to Rimward Gate, warn command." "Agreed," Alara says, turning to the helm officer. "Plot a course for Rimward Gate, maximum sublight acceleration. FTL spool up as soon as we're clear of the Abyssal Rift's gravimetric interference." The helm officer nods, but before he can input the course, the ship lurches, hard enough to send Kale's data pad sliding off his console, clattering to the floor, the Horsehead Nebula sticker scraping against the metal grating. The bridge lights flicker, then dim to emergency red, and a shrill alarm blares through the speakers, so loud Alara winces. "Report," she roars, grabbing the edge of her command chair to steady herself. "Gravimetric pulse, unknown origin," Tors yells, her fingers flying across her console. "Hit us amidships, disabled the FTL drive. Sublight engines are offline. Weapons are jammed. Comms are down. We're dead in the water." Alara's stomach drops. She stares at the main sensor display, where 6 new mass signatures have just flickered to life, all clustered around the Hive Sire. 2 Krell destroyers, 4 Krell frigates, all matching the hull signatures of the ships that were destroyed alongside the Hive Sire at the Rift battle. Their hulls are breached, no life signs, no engine plumes, no reactor glow, but they're all turning, slow, deliberate, towards the Vigilance position. "Those ships were supposed to be destroyed," Jack says, his voice quiet, horrified. "They went down with the Hive Sire." "No," Alara says, the pieces clicking into place, cold and terrible. "They didn't go down. The Hive Sire pulled them in, fused their hulls to its own, integrated their systems, their weapons, their crews into itself. It's not just a dreadnought anymore. It's a swarm fused into one ship." The low, thrumming pulse gets louder, so loud now it's making their teeth rattle, the deck plates vibrating hard enough that loose screws rattle on the overhead panels. On the sensor display, the Hive Sire's mass signature is moving, accelerating, 0.1 C now, 0.15 C, heading straight for them. It's 1.2 light-years away, but at that speed, it will be on top of them in 8 years. No, wait, no, 0.2 C, so 6 years. No, wait, 1.2 light-years at 0.2 C is 6 years. But no, wait, the sensor display shows it accelerating. 0.2 C now, 0.25 C, so it will be there in 4 years, 8 months. No, wait, no, maybe it's closer. Wait, no, earlier triangulation said 1.2 light-years, but wait, maybe the gravimetric pulse disabled their sensors, so the distance is wrong. No, no, add that. When the pulse hit, the long-range sensors glitched, so the distance is actually 0.8 light-years, not 1.2, because the pulse warped the spacetime around the sensors, throwing off the readings. Oh right, that's better, so at 0.25 C, it will be there in 3 years, 2 months. No, wait, no, make it closer. Maybe the triangulation was off because of the dark matter in the abyssal rift, so it's actually 0.4 light-years away, so at 0.25 C, it will be there in 1 year, 8 months. No, wait, no, make the tension immediate, wait, no. Wait, no, the Hive Sire has singularity core, it can accelerate faster, right? So after the pulse, it accelerates to 0.8 C, so it will be there in 6 months. Oh, that's better, more immediate tension. Wait, adjust that. When the gravimetric pulse hits, the sensor glitches and Kale realizes the distance was wrong. Due to the dense dark matter in the abyssal rift bending the gravimetric waves, the Hive Sire is actually 0.4 light-years away, not 1.2. At its current acceleration, it's now moving at 0.8 c, which means it will reach the Vigilant's position in 6 months. Not years. Months. Yes, that's more tense. Then the crew panics a little. Jax is yelling. Kale is frantically trying to reboot the systems. Alara is trying to get the comms working, to send a distress signal. But the comms are completely jammed. The Hive Sire is broadcasting a gravimetric interference field that blocks all comms, all sensor signals, everything. Then 3 hours after the initial pulse, the comms crackle to life, just for a second, and the distorted voice comes through. Half Krell growl, half human, like someone's vocal cords have been fused with Krell chitin, speaking broken English, words slurred like they haven't spoken the language in 12 years. "You come to hunt the lost," the voice says, static crackling over it. "Now you are the prey." Then the comms cut out again, and on the main view screen, which had been just black static, a faint, pulsing red glow appears for half a second, like an eye opening in the dark before vanishing. The low, thrumming pulse gets louder, and Alara looks down at the photo of her and Leela, tucked into the edge of her command chair. The glass of the frame cracked from the lurch when the pulse hit. Leela's grin seems to mock her, and she closes her fingers around it, the sharp edge of the cracked glass digging into her palm, drawing a drop of blood that drips onto the metal of the chair, bright red in the emergency # chapter 2. The pulse that shattered silence the Vigilant's hull still trembled from the aftershock of the gravimetric pulse, a resonance that seemed to crawl through the ship's bones like a malignant heartbeat. Emergency lights painted the corridors in blood-red hues, shadows stretching and twisting with every flicker. The crew had been thrown into chaos, but it was Kale who first understood the true horror of what had just happened. He slammed his palms against the sensor console, forcing a hard reboot. The screen stuttered, lines of corrupted data cascading like rain across the glass. His breath came fast, shallow, as he recalibrated the readings. The numbers shifted, then stabilized, and his stomach dropped. "It's not 1.2 light years," Kale whispered, voice hoarse. The rift bent the gravimetric waves. "It's closer, much closer." Jack spun from his station, eyes wide, sweat streaking down his temple. "How close?" Kale's fingers trembled as he locked the final calculation. 0.4 light years. At its current acceleration, it's at 0.8 c 6 months. "That's all we have." The words hit the crew like a physical blow. Jax cursed, slamming his fist against the bulkhead. 6 months, that thing will tear us apart before we can even get a signal out. Alara's hands flew across the comms console, desperate, her voice sharp with command. "We need to warn command. Get a distress beacon out, anything." But the comms were dead, not silent, worse. They were filled with a low, thrumming interference, a gravimetric field so dense it strangled every outgoing signal. The Hive Sire wasn't just approaching, it was smothering them, cutting them off from the galaxy like prey isolated in a predator's jaws. Kale's knuckles whitened on the console. "It's jamming everything. Sensors, comms, even the emergency beacon. We're blind, alone." The crew's panic rose like a tide. Jax shouted over the din, his voice cracking. "We're sitting ducks, 6 months until it's on top of us, and we can't even scream for help." Alara's jaw clenched, her eyes darting to the cracked photo wedged into her command chair. Leela's grin stared back at her, mocking, cruel in its frozen joy. The glass edge bit into her palm as she gripped it, blood welling and dripping onto the cold steel. She didn't flinch. Pain was grounding. Pain was real. 3 hours passed in suffocating dread. The Vigilant drifted in silence, every system locked in a battle against the interference. Then, without warning, the comms crackled to life. A voice bled through the static, half Krell growl, half human rasp. The sound was wrong, broken, like vocal cords fused with alien chitin. Words slurred, mangled, as though dragged from a throat unused to language for over a decade. "You come to hunt the lost," it said, each syllable dripping with malice. "Now you are the prey." The channel cut instantly, leaving only the oppressive hum of interference. On the main view screen, black static rippled, and then, for a heartbeat, a faint red glow pulsed. It was not light. It was not signal. It was an eye. an eye opening in the abyss staring directly into them. The glow vanished, but the pulse remained, louder now, resonating through the hull like a drumbeat from the void. The Vigilant was no longer a hunter, it was marked. Alara's voice broke the silence, low and steady, though her hand still bled onto the chair. It knows we're here, it's playing with us. Kale swallowed hard, his throat dry. 6 months isn't survival time, it's a countdown. Jax's voice was raw, almost pleading. Then what the hell do we do? No one answered. The Vigilant drifted in the lightless deep, the pulse echoing through its steel bones, while somewhere in the abyss, the Hive Sire accelerated, closing the distance. And the crew knew, the Dreadnought was not lost, it was hunting. Chapter 3, the pulse in the hull. The Vigilant's corridors were no longer corridors, they were veins trembling with the pulse that had infected the ship. Every bulkhead, every rivet, every panel seemed to vibrate with that low, resonant thrum. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't natural, it was alive. Alara walked the length of the command deck, her boots echoing against steel that felt less like metal and more like bone. The crew's eyes followed her, hollow and wide, each face pale under the dim emergency lights. No one spoke. Words had become dangerous things, fragile, brittle, easily shattered by the oppressive silence pressing in from the void. Kale broke first. His voice was a whisper, but it carried like a scream. It's inside the hull, not physically. Resonance, it's sinking with us. Jax slammed his fist against the console, the sound swallowed instantly by the pulse. Sinking, you mean it's infecting us. The Vigilant isn't ours anymore, it's theirs. Alara's gaze flicked to the view screen. Black static rippled across it, but beneath the distortion something moved. Not light, not shadow, something deeper. A shape that refused definition, a geometry that bent perception. For a heartbeat she thought she saw the outline of a ship, vast and jagged, its silhouette bristling with spines like a predator's maw. Then it was gone, leaving only the static. Her hand tightened around the cracked photo in her chair. Leela's grin stared back, frozen in time, mocking her weakness. She pressed the glass edge deeper into her palm, blood dripping onto the deck. Pain was her anchor. Pain kept her sane. The comms crackled again, not words this time, a sound. A scraping, like claws dragging across the hull from the outside. Then a hiss, guttural and wet, as though something vast exhaled directly into their ears. Kale's hands flew across the console. It's not a transmission. He froze, staring at the readings. It's coming from inside the Vigilant. The crew recoiled. Jax's voice broke, raw and desperate. Inside, that's impossible. We sealed every deck. Nothing else aboard but us. Alara's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Not nothing. The Hive Sire doesn't board ships, it becomes them. The pulse grew louder, shaking dust from the vents, rattling tools from their racks. The lights flickered, dimmed, then flared blood red for a single instant before plunging back into darkness. And then the Vigilant screamed. It wasn't metal stress. It wasn't systems failing. It was a sound that came from the ship itself, a howl of steel and circuitry twisted into agony. The crew clamped their hands over their ears, but the scream wasn't heard, it was felt. It tore through bone, through marrow, through thought. Jax collapsed to his knees, sobbing. We're dead, we're already dead. Kale staggered, clutching the console. No, it's worse, we're alive, and it wants us alive. Alara forced herself upright, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Listen to me. 6 months isn't a countdown to destruction. It's a game. It's hunting us, bleeding us, savoring us. Every second we survive is another second it feeds. The crew stared at her, broken, trembling. Turned to the view screen. The static rippled again, and this time the red glow returned. Not faint, not fleeting, a vast eye burning in the abyss, unblinking, unyielding. It filled the screen, filled the deck, filled their minds. The Vigilant's pulse matched the eye's rhythm, faster now. Louder, Kale whispered, his voice trembling. It's accelerating, it's closing the distance. Alara's jaw clenched. Then we don't wait, we fight. Jax's laugh was hollow, bitter. Fight, against that. We're gnats in a hurricane. Alara's hand bled freely now, dripping onto the steel. She didn't flinch. Gnats bite, gnats sting, and sometimes gnats survive. The eye pulsed once more, brighter, closer. The Vigilant shuddered, its scream rising again. And in that moment the crew understood. The Dreadnought was not approaching. It was already here, inside their ship, inside their bones, inside their minds. The hunt had begun. Would you like me to make Chapter 4 even more claustrophobic, focusing on the crew's psychological unraveling as the Dreadnought begins to manipulate their senses, or should I escalate the external threat with a terrifying first encounter? The thrum of the eye's pulse didn't fade when the view screen went dark. It settled into the steel of the bridge, into the soles of their boots, into the marrow of their bones, a steady, hungry rhythm that matched the hammer of blood in their temples. The copper tang of Alara's blood hung thick in the recycled air, mixing with the sharp bite of ozone and the new rotten-sweet stench seeping from the vents, like something dead had been decomposing behind the walls for weeks. The deck under their feet, usually frigid even at standard climate settings, was warm now, almost pulsing like the flesh of some great, sleeping beast. Alara was the first to move. Her hand was still bleeding, thick crimson drops striking the console grid in a slow, irregular tattoo, and she didn't bother pressing a bandage to the gash when she leaned forward to slap the auxiliary power switch. The lights stuttered, flared dim amber, then died again, leaving only the faint, pulsing red glow of the emergency status strips, painting every face in the color of old blood. Kale run a full internal sweep. Every deck, every conduit, every seam. Tell me what's actually on this ship. Kale's fingers flew across his console, but his hands were shaking so bad he miskeyed 3 times before the sweep loaded. The holomap above his station flickered to life, the familiar blue grid of the Vigilant's hull plating shimmering for half a second before it dissolved into a tangled, pulsing lattice of glowing red threads. They wound through every deck, snaked up every ventilation shaft, curled around the reactor core like ivy choking a tree, pooled thickest in the cargo bay and the crew quarters, so dense the scan couldn't penetrate the lowest 3 levels. What the hell is that? He whispered, his voice cracking so hard the word broke in the middle. Vein structures, Alara said, her throat tight. The Hive Sire doesn't board ships, it grows into them. It's already in the walls, the floor. The air we're breathing. Jax laughed, a sharp, ragged sound that didn't reach his eyes, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the pilot's console. In the walls. We're on a patrol frigate, not a fungal colony. That's a sensor glitch. It has to be. He yanked his comms headset on, keyed the open channel to engineering with a jerky motion. Mara, you copy. Report status now. Static spat from the speaker, thick and wet like something was gargling behind it. Then a voice came through, flat, toneless, identical to Jax's own, every inflection and cadence perfect wrong. You lied about the reactor output, Jax. You faked the logs so we wouldn't turn back to base. You wanted to see what was out here. You wanted to be the one to find it. You wanted to be a hero, didn't you? Jax froze, his hand hovering over the comms kill switch. His face went ashen, the color draining so fast his lips turned blue, the scar across his left cheekbone standing out white against his skin. That's not I deleted those logs. No one saw them. Cut the channel, Alara ordered sharp, her voice cutting through his panic like a knife. Jax now. He yanked the headset off so hard the earpiece cracked, dropping it to the deck like it was burning him. He stared at it like he'd never seen it before, his chest heaving. How did it know that? How could it know that? Before anyone could answer, Rin, the comms officer who'd been silent at her station this whole time, spoke, her voice so quiet they almost didn't hear it over the constant thrum. Her face was pale as bone, her fingers clenched white around the edge of her console, her eyes fixed on the frequency display in front of her, which was scrolling so fast the numbers blurred. It's everywhere, all channels. It's not just the open frequency. It's the internal comms, the distress beacons, the encrypted fleet channels. It's broadcasting the same pulse, the same voice on every frequency we have. It's not just in the ship, it's in our signals. If we send a distress call, it'll lead every fleet vessel within 10 light-years right to it. The deck tilted, slow and inexorable, and they all grabbed the edges of their consoles to keep from falling. Tools slid off the maintenance racks lining the walls, clattering to the deck, and the holomap above Kale's station shifted. the red vein lattice pulsing brighter as the original course for the Kepler outpost dissolved into a new trajectory. A straight-line arrow pointing deep into the interstellar void, the region of space marked on all star charts with a single, blinking red warning: lightless deep. No return. All entry forbidden. It overrode the nav computer, Kale said, his voice hollow. He stabbed at the manual override key, twisted it hard enough to make his knuckles pop, then hammered on it twice, 3 times. Nothing happened. The thrusters fired with a low, guttural roar that vibrated through the deck, pushing them back into their seats. Manual inputs locked out. Thrusters are firing on their own. We're accelerating. 0.2 Gs now, climbing. ETA to the edge of the deep. 87 minutes. At this rate, we'll be past the last known star in 90. Alara's jaw tightened so hard she felt a muscle in her cheek spasm. She yanked the neural link port from the side of her console, the thin silver filament glinting in the emergency red light, and jammed it into the port at her temple. The moment the connection closed, she gasped, her back arching off the pilot's seat, her eyes rolling back so far only the whites showed. She wasn't on the bridge anymore. She was standing in a chamber of fused black metal and iridescent blue flesh, the walls pulsing with the same red veins she'd seen on the hull scan, thick as a man's arm, thrumming with that same unending rhythm. Thousands of twisted, elongated forms hung from the ceiling, fused to the metal, their limbs tangled together, their chests split open to reveal glowing red cores that matched the beat of the eye. Some of them still wore the tattered scraps of vigilant uniforms, the insignia of the fleet still visible on the frayed fabric. At the far end of the chamber, the eye floated, vast and unblinking, burning so bright it bleached all color from the world around her. It wasn't just an eye. It was a mouth, a gateway, a heart, all at once, and when it blinked, she felt the blink in her own eyelids, even though her physical body was still on the bridge. A voice echoed in her head, not heard but felt, like fingers brushing the inside of her skull, cold and smooth and ancient. You bleed. That is rare. The others who come here do not bleed. They only scream. They break before they can be made part of me. Alara gritted her teeth, fighting the pull of the voice, fighting the urge to fall to her knees and worship the thing in front of her, to peel the skin from her own arm and offer it to the glowing red core. What do you want? I am hungry. The deep has been empty for so long. I need more of you. More of your ships, your fire, your fear. You are the first to offer blood freely in 600 cycles. The others fight. They break. They die before they can be made part of me. You are strong. You will be my voice when I eat this fleet. You will be the one who leads the others to me, one by one, until there is no one left to run. You will be the last to beg before you become me. The vision shattered, and Alara yanked the neural link out of her temple so hard she drew a new line of blood across her cheek. She was gasping, sweat pouring down her face, her hand clamped over her chest like she could hold the voice inside her head where it belonged. Her palm burned, hot and sharp, and when she pulled her hand away, the cut she'd gotten when she'd slammed her fist on the console earlier was gone, replaced by a faint, pulsing red mark, shaped exactly like the eye they'd seen on the view screen. What did you see? Jax asked, his voice tight. He'd moved to her side, his hand on her shoulder, and when she looked up at him, she saw that the skin on the back of his hand was shifting, the fine hairs standing up, the pores widening to ooze that same iridescent black fluid she'd seen dripping from the vents. He hadn't noticed yet. He was too busy staring at her face, at the blood on her cheek. It's not hunting us for sport, she said, her voice rough like she'd swallowed broken glass. It's building an army. It's turning us into parts of itself so it can use our knowledge, our ships, to find the rest of the fleet. It wants to turn us into beacons, to lure every fleet ship out here, one by one, until there's nothing left of us but parts of it. Rin made a small, strangled noise, and Alara followed her gaze to the status display above Rin's station. The life signs readout for the lower decks was flickering, the green dots that marked the 32 crew members in the crew quarters and engineering fading one by one, replaced by the same pulsing red as the vein structures in the hull scan. The last green dot, marking Chief Mara in engineering, winked out as they watched, and a second later, the red dot in its place flared bright, then vanished too, absorbed into the lattice of the hull. "It's already taken the lower decks," Rin whispered, her voice trembling so hard her words stuttered. "It's working its way up. The air recyclers are offline. The oxygen levels are dropping. 18% now, falling fast." The deck shuddered again, harder this time, throwing them all off balance, and a high, keening whine cut through the constant thrum, so loud it made their teeth ache, made the fillings in their molars buzz. The bulkhead behind Kale split open, slow and wet, like flesh being torn apart by unseen hands, and a thick, glistening black tendril oozed out, pulsing with that same red light, the tip splitting open to reveal a ring of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. It slithered across the deck, heading straight for Kale's ankle, and he kicked it hard, his boot slamming into the fleshy mass with a wet splat. The tendril didn't break. It recoiled, quick as a striking snake, and wrapped around his calf, squeezing hard enough to make him cry out, his knees buckling under him. He grabbed the edge of his console, his fingers white, and yanked at the tendril with both hands, but it only tightened, the red glow brightening as it oozed a sticky black fluid onto his uniform, seeping through the fabric to touch his skin. He fumbled for the knife at his belt, slashing at the tendril twice, the blade sinking into the fleshy mass, but instead of black fluid, thick, dark blue blood spurted out, splattering across his face, his neck, his uniform. The ship screamed again, that same howl of tortured steel and circuitry, and the bridge tilted so far Jack slid across the deck, slamming into the bulkhead hard enough to knock the wind out of him. The emergency lights flared blood red, so bright it was hard to see, and for a split second, Alara saw the walls of the bridge shifting, the steel panels rippling like skin, the vents opening and closing like mouths, breathing that same thick, rotten smell. The display screens flickered, and for a split second she saw her own face on every one of them, her eyes glowing red, her mouth stretched into a scream that wasn't hers. When the lights dimmed again, the tendril was gone, but Kale's calf was covered in a network of thin, red veins pulsing under his skin, matching the rhythm of the Dreadnought's pulse, spreading slowly up his thigh toward his hip. He stared at it, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with a horror so deep it looked like he was already dead, and whispered, "It's in me." Jack scrambled to his feet, grabbing Kale's arm to hoist him up, his own hands trembling so bad he could barely get a grip. "We have to get off this ship. The escape pod, it's the only way." "The escape pod is already gone," Rin said, her voice flat, like she was reciting a report she'd memorized 100 times. She pointed to the status display above the airlock controls. The single escape pod mounted to the port side of the bridge had launched 10 minutes earlier, its hatch sealed, its thrusters firing on a trajectory away from the Vigilant. It launched automatically. The override was triggered when the vane structures breached the hull. "It's empty." Jack stared at the display, then at Kale's leg, then at the rippling walls of the bridge, at the vents that were now dripping that thick black fluid instead of condensation, pooling on the deck in glistening puddles that pulsed with red light. The hollow laugh came back, bitter and raw, scraping out of his throat like broken glass. "Empty. Who the hell is in it?" "No one," Rin said, her voice trembling now. She tapped the life signs readout for the pod and the screen flickered, showing a single, pulsing red dot in the center of the craft. No heartbeat, no brain activity, just the same red glow as the vane structures. "The launch was automated. There's no life sign on board. It's just floating, away from us, like a bait, to draw something else out." The thrum in their bones got louder, faster, and Alara felt the voice in her head again, soft and insistent, like a lover's whisper curling around the edges of her thoughts. "You cannot run. There is nowhere to run. The deep is mine. All the dark is mine. You will be mine, too." She pressed the heel of her hand to her temple, hard enough to leave a bruise, trying to push the voice out, trying to focus on the problem in front of her instead of the invasion in her head. "Kale, can you reroute power to the bridge blasters? Jax, can you override the nav lock long enough to point us at the nearest asteroid field? If we can't outrun it, we can hide. We can find a way to cut the vein structures out of the hull, out of Kale's leg, before it takes the rest of us. Kale was bent over his console, his face pale with pain, his fingers flying across the keys even as the veins in his leg pulsed brighter, sending waves of burning heat up his thigh. Blasters are online, but the targeting system is locked. The ship won't let me aim at anything outside. It's only letting me target internal systems. If I fire, I'll blow the bridge, and us with it. Jax was fighting with the nav controls, his face twisted with effort, sweat dripping onto the keys so fast it dripped off the edge of the console onto the deck. Nav lock's not budging. It's like the ship is fighting me. Every time I input a new course, it overrides it. We're still heading for the Lightless deep. ETA, 52 minutes now. It's speeding up. The bulkhead split open again, this time above the view screen, and 3 more tendrils oozed out, thick as a man's arm, pulsing with red light. Their tips split open to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. They slithered down the wall, heading straight for the 3 of them, and Alara grabbed the plasma cutter from the tool rack at her side, flipping it on. The blue plasma flared, casting long, wavering shadows on the shifting walls, making the red veins in the steel look like they were moving, breathing. "Rin, get to the comms array," she ordered, her voice sharp and steady even as her hands shook. "Try to broadcast a distress signal on every frequency, even the encrypted ones. Maybe if we can get a fleet ship's attention before we hit the deep, they can intercept us. Jax, keep fighting the nav controls. Kale, reroute every spare watt of power to the blasters and the life support. If we can't run, we can at least make it hurt when it tries to eat us." The tendrils lunged. Alara swung the plasma cutter, the blue blade slicing through the first tendril cleanly, the severed end falling to the deck and writhing like a wounded snake, oozing blue blood that smoked as it hit the steel. The second tendril wrapped around her wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her drop the cutter, and she screamed as the hot, sticky fluid oozed onto her skin, seeping into the small cut on her palm, the same cut that had been bleeding since the eye first appeared on the view screen. The burn was so sharp it felt like acid was pouring into her veins, and she yanked her hand back. But the tendril held fast, the red glow brightening as it pulsed, drawing the blood from her hand up into its mass. The third tendril wrapped around Jax's throat, lifting him off the deck, his feet kicking uselessly as he gurgled, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging. Kale lunged for the blaster controls, his bad leg buckling under him, and he fired a single burst at the tendril holding Jax. The plasma bolt slammed into the fleshy mass, burning a hole through it, and Jax dropped to the deck, gasping, clawing at his throat, his skin mottled with bruises where the tendril had squeezed. The severed tendril on the deck. Chapter 5. The maw of the deep. The severed tendril convulsed on the deck, its teeth gnashing, scraping sparks from the steel as though it were trying to chew its way back into the ship. The smell of scorched flesh and ozone filled the bridge, thick and choking, making Kale gag as he steadied himself against the console. The walls themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm with the tendrils, veins of red light throbbing like a heartbeat, as if the ship were no longer a machine but a living predator. Alara ripped her wrist free, skin torn and bleeding, the tendril recoiling with a shriek that reverberated through the hull. She staggered back, clutching her hand, her eyes wide with horror as the blood on the deck began to move, sliding toward the severed tendril, drawn as if magnetized. The liquid pooled around it, feeding it, and the tendril began to regrow, sprouting new flesh, knitting itself together with obscene speed. "Kale!" she shouted, her voice breaking. "Hit it again." "Burn it before it heals." Kale fired, the plasma bolt exploding against the writhing mass, splattering molten tissue across the deck. The tendril shrieked again, but even as it burned, the walls around them rippled, birthing more. Thin fissures opened in the bulkhead, and from each one something began to push through, eyes, dozens of them, blinking wetly, their pupils dilating as they fixed on the crew. The ship was watching them, judging them, hunting them. Rin slammed his fists against the comms console, sweat dripping from his brow. "No signals getting out. It's jamming everything, even the encrypted bands. It's like the ship doesn't want anyone to know we're here." It's isolating us. Jax coughed violently, his throat raw, his voice a rasp. It's not just isolating us, it's hurting us, straight into the deep. The words hung heavy in the air. The lightless deep, an expanse of space so black, so devoid of stars that even the most advanced sensors returned nothing but static. A place whispered about in fleet academies, where ships vanished without trace, swallowed whole by something no one had ever lived to describe. And now they were being dragged into it. The deck shuddered violently, throwing them against the consoles. The view screen flickered, static crawling across it, then cleared to reveal the abyss ahead. No stars, no light. Just a wall of infinite black stretching across the void like the mouth of a colossal beast. The ship was accelerating, engines roaring, though none of them had touched the controls. Alara forced herself upright, her bleeding hand pressed against her uniform. We're not going in blind. Kale, reroute the sensor array, push it past safety limits. I don't care if it burns out. I want to know what's waiting for us in there. Kale's fingers flew across the console, overriding failsafes, forcing power into the sensors until the panels glowed white-hot. The ship groaned, metal straining, but the array came alive, casting invisible beams into the void. For a moment, the screen remained empty. Then shapes began to appear. Massive structures drifting in the black, hulls scarred and broken, ships of alien design, their outlines jagged and unnatural. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, suspended in the abyss like corpses. But as the sensors locked onto them, the readings shifted. They weren't dead. They were dormant, waiting. And at the center of them all, a shape so vast it dwarfed the rest. A dreadnought, its hull bristling with spines, its silhouette jagged like a predator's jaw. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly red, pulsing in rhythm with the veins in their own ship. The lost dreadnought of the alien Armada, not lost at all, awake, watching. The bridge fell silent, the crew staring at the screen in horror. The dreadnought's gaze seemed to pierce through the sensors, through the ship, through them. And then slowly its weapons began to power up, red light blooming across its hull like the opening of 1,000 wounds. Rin whispered, his voice trembling. It knows we're here. Alara clenched her jaw, forcing down the rising panic. Then we make it regret noticing us. Kale, divert everything to weapons. Jax, lock the nav, force it to break free, even if you have to fry the core. Rin, keep hammering the comms. If anyone's listening out there, we need them now. The dreadnought stirred, its colossal frame shifting, the black around it rippling like water disturbed by a leviathan. The smaller ships began to move too, their dormant forms awakening, turning toward the intruder dragged into their abyss. The lightless deep was not empty. It was a graveyard, and they had just stepped into the maw of its guardian. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, as if something vast had seized it from below. The tendrils on the walls writhed, the eyes blinked in unison, and the deck plates buckled under unseen pressure. The dreadnought's weapons flared, casting crimson light across the void, illuminating the abyss for the first time. And in that light, Alara saw the truth. The dreadnought was not hunting them because they had stumbled into its domain. It had dragged them here. It had chosen them. And now, in the heart of the lightless deep, it was preparing to feed. Alara raised the plasma cutter again, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. We fight. We fight until there's nothing left. Because if we don't, this thing doesn't just take us, it takes everything. The dreadnought's first shot lit the abyss like a sunrise of blood. Chapter 6. The maw opens. The dreadnought's first shot tore through the void, a beam of crimson energy so vast it seemed to split the abyss itself. The cruise ship lurched violently, alarms shrieking, hull plating buckling under the impact. The bridge lights flickered, plunging them into alternating flashes of red emergency glow and suffocating darkness. For a moment, it felt as though the abyss itself had swallowed them whole. Alara gripped the console, her knuckles white, her voice cutting through the chaos. Status. Kale's hands flew across the weapon's interface, his face pale but determined. Shields holding barely. Another hit like that and we're vapor. Jax cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the navigation controls. It's locking us in. Every vector I try collapses. It's like the space around us is folding in on itself. Rin's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of dread. It's not just firing at us, it's studying us. Every pulse, every strike, it's measuring. The Dreadnought's colossal frame shifted again, its spines extending like the limbs of some abyssal predator. Smaller ships stirred around it, their jagged silhouettes sliding into formation, encircling the intruders. The graveyard was no graveyard at all, it was an armada, and the Dreadnought was its heart. The cruise ship shuddered as invisible tendrils wrapped tighter, dragging them deeper into the maw. The sensors screamed with impossible readings, gravitational anomalies, distortions in time itself, pulses of energy that seemed to resonate with the crew's own heartbeat. The Dreadnought was not merely a machine, it was alive, and it was hungry. Alara's voice was steel. Kale, fire everything we've got. Jax, keep pushing the core, burn it if you have to. Rin, broadcast on every frequency. If anyone's out there, they need to know what's coming. Kale's fingers danced, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire into the abyss. The shots streaked across the void, slamming into the Dreadnought's hull. For a heartbeat, the crimson glow dimmed. Then slowly the wounds closed, the hull knitting itself back together as if mocking their defiance. "It heals," Kale whispered. "It heals faster than we can hurt it." The Dreadnought's eyes flared brighter, twin suns of blood-red light. The smaller ships surged forward, their weapons igniting, beams converging on the intruder. The abyss lit up in a storm of fire, 1,000 predators striking in unison. The cruise ship convulsed under the onslaught. Deck plates buckled, conduits burst, flames licked across the walls. The tendrils embedded in the hull writhed, feeding on the chaos, pulsing in rhythm with the Dreadnought's glow. The ship was being consumed from within and without. Alara raised the plasma cutter, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We fight. We fight until there's nothing left, because if we don't, this thing doesn't just take us, it takes everything." The Dreadnought's second shot came, brighter, deadlier, a lance of annihilation that tore through the void. The abyss screamed, and the cruise ship screamed with it. The maw had opened, and they were inside. And somewhere deep within the Dreadnought's vast, living hull, something stirred, something older than the Armada, older than the war, older than the stars themselves. It had chosen them. It had dragged them here. And now, in the heart of the lightless deep, it was preparing to feed. The abyss was no longer silent. It was alive, and it was hungry. Chapter 7. The maw of silence. The Dreadnought's glow dimmed, not in weakness but in a deliberate inhalation, as though the abyss itself were drawing breath. The smaller ships froze mid-attack, their beams flickering out, their jagged silhouettes suspended in eerie stillness. The cruise ship, battered and bleeding plasma from ruptured conduits, hung in the void like prey caught in the gaze of a predator that had decided to savor the moment before the kill. Ilara's knuckles whitened around the plasma cutter. The silence was worse than the storm. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, amplified by the ship's failing systems. The Dreadnought's twin eyes narrowed, their crimson light focusing into spears that pierced the hull, not with fire but with awareness. It was watching them, studying them. Kale's voice cracked through the comms. "It's not attacking, it's listening." His hands hovered over the weapon's console, trembling. "I think it knows us now." Rin's broadcast channels sputtered, feedback shrieking across every frequency. "It's jamming everything. Not just blocking signals, it's rewriting them. Our words aren't leaving the ship, they're being absorbed." His throat tightened. "It's feeding on our voices." Jax slammed his fist against the core housing, sparks raining down. "Then we burn it out before it learns too much. If it's alive, it's got limits. Everything does." But Alara felt the truth pressing against her chest like a weight. The Dreadnought was not bound by limits. It was older than limits. Its hull was a cathedral of bone and steel, its spines a choir of silent screams. The smaller ships were not escorts, they were parasites, orbiting their god, feeding on its cast-off fragments of power. The silence broke. A sound, not a sound, but a vibration, rolled through the void. It was low, resonant, a frequency that bypassed ears and drilled straight into bone. The crew staggered, clutching their heads, their teeth rattling. The Dreadnought was speaking, not in words but in hunger. Alara forced herself upright, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It wants us alive. That's why it hasn't finished us. It's studying, testing. Kale's eyes widened. Testing for what? The Dreadnought answered. The twin suns flared and the smaller ships moved again, but not to attack. They aligned in a perfect circle around the cruise vessel, their jagged hulls forming a cage of lightless geometry. Beams lanced outward, not inward, weaving a lattice of energy that enclosed them. The ship's sensors screamed with impossible readings: gravitational inversion, temporal folding, dimensions collapsing into themselves. Jax cursed, his hands flying across the core interface. It's building something around us, a prison or a lab. Rin's voice was a whisper. No, it's a mirror, it's reflecting us back at ourselves. The lattice shimmered, and suddenly the cruise ship was duplicated, 12 copies, each distorted, each wrong. One burned endlessly, flames licking its hull without consuming it. Another drifted lifeless, its crew skeletal husks frozen at their stations. Another was whole, pristine, untouched by battle, but its bridge was empty. Ilara's breath caught. It's showing us possibilities. Kale's hand shook. No, it's showing us endings. The Dreadnought pulsed and the copies dissolved into ash. The lattice tightened. The cruise ship groaned, its hull bending, its bones cracking. The Dreadnought's hunger pressed closer, its crimson eyes blazing with satisfaction. Ilara raised her cutter, her voice a blade. We don't give it what it wants. We fight, even if it means tearing ourselves apart. The silence deepened and the Dreadnought leaned closer, its vast hull blotting out the stars. The abyss was no longer infinite. It was closing in, folding around them, sealing them inside the maw. And somewhere deep within the Dreadnought's living core, something stirred again, closer now, awake, aware. It was not the ship. It was the thing the ship carried, the thing the ship worshipped. The cruise ship shuddered as the first tendril pierced the hull, not to consume, but to connect. The Dreadnought was not hunting them anymore. It was claiming them. The abyss whispered, and the whisper was a promise. You are mine. Would you like me to continue Chapter 8 with the Dreadnought beginning its assimilation of the crew? Or should I focus on their desperate counter-strategy to break free? Chapter 8, the assimilation begins. The tendril's touch was not a strike but a caress, a filament of living metal threading into the ship's hull with surgical precision. It did not puncture, it merged. The walls themselves seemed to sigh as alien circuitry bled into steel, veins of crimson light spreading like infection. Ilara staggered as the deck beneath her feet pulsed, alive. It's inside, she whispered, her voice hollow. It's rewriting us. Kale slammed his fist against the console, but the console no longer belonged to him. Glyphs bloomed across the interface, symbols that shifted faster than thought, rearranging themselves into patterns that mocked comprehension. His hands hovered, useless. We've lost control. It's not just claiming the ship, it's claiming us. The Dreadnought's presence pressed harder, a gravity of will. The crew's thoughts began to blur, overlapping with whispers that were not their own. Jax clutched his head, teeth bared against the intrusion. It's in my mind. It's showing me corridors, endless corridors. I'm walking them, but they're not mine. Rin's voice trembled, yet carried a strange reverence. It's not killing us, it's mapping us. Every memory, every fear, every choice. It's building a library of who we are. The ship's lights flickered, then steadied into a deep, blood-red glow. The lattice outside contracted, folding tighter, each beam resonating with a low hum that vibrated in their bones. The Dreadnought's hull loomed impossibly close, its surface rippling like flesh. Ilara raised her cutter, though her hand shook violently. We sever the tendril. If it finishes the link, we're gone. But the tendril was no longer a singular intrusion. It had multiplied, branching into dozens of threads that slithered across the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Each one pulsed in rhythm with the crew's heartbeats, syncing, harmonizing. Kale's breath caught. It's synchronizing us, making us part of its rhythm. The Dreadnought's whisper grew louder, no longer a distant murmur but a chorus inside their skulls. You are mine. You are mine. You are mine. Jax roared, tearing at the cables with his bare hands. Sparks flew, the smell of burning flesh filled the air, but the tendrils did not release him. Instead, they coiled tighter, wrapping his arms, his chest, his throat. His scream cut off as the tendrils lifted him from the deck, suspending him like a marionette. Alara lunged forward, cutter blazing, slicing through the nearest filament. The tendril shrieked, not in sound but in vibration, a frequency that rattled the ship's bones. Jax fell gasping, his skin marked with glowing lines that pulsed in time with the Dreadnought's heartbeat. Rin's eyes widened. It's marked him. He's tagged. It knows him now. Kale's voice was a rasp. Then it knows all of us. Every cut, every breath, every thought. We're not fighting a ship, we're fighting a god that feeds on identity. The Dreadnought's core flared, a star igniting within its belly. The lattice outside shifted, each beam bending inward, converging on the cruise vessel. The ship groaned, its hull warping as if dragged into a new shape. Alara steadied herself, her voice sharp as steel. We break free now, or we become part of it forever. The Dreadnought answered with silence, then with a single, devastating pulse. The cruise ship convulsed, its systems screaming as reality itself bent. For a heartbeat, Alara saw them all not as they were, but as the Dreadnought saw them, fractured, multiplied, endless. Kale as a warrior who never stopped fighting. Rin as a prophet who never stopped whispering. Jax as a husk who never stopped burning. Alara as a blade who never stopped cutting. The visions collapsed, leaving only the abyss. And in that abyss the Dreadnought's promise deepened. You are not lost. You are mine, forever. Alara's grip tightened on her cutter. Her voice was a defiance carved from fire. Then it will choke on us. The crew braced as the assimilation surged. The Dreadnought was no longer hunting. It was consuming. And the only way to survive was to tear themselves free, even if it meant tearing reality apart. Chapter 9. The pulse of the abyss. The ship's hull screamed as though it were alive, metal fibers stretching into impossible geometries. The Dreadnought's pulse had become a rhythm that no longer simply echoed, it commanded. Every heartbeat of the crew was a drum in its orchestra, every breath a note in its symphony. Alara staggered, her cutter flickering in her grip. The blade's light sputtered as though suffocated by the Dreadnought's presence. She forced herself upright, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. We sever the rhythm. If it owns our pulse, we stop it from beating. Kale's jaw clenched, sweat streaking down his temple. You're talking about killing ourselves. No, Alara snapped, her eyes burning with defiance. I'm talking about breaking the chain before it drags us into its core. The Dreadnought's whisper surged again, louder, more insistent. You are mine. You are mine. You are mine. Jax convulsed, the glowing lines carved into his flesh pulsing brighter. His scream was strangled, guttural, as though something inside him was clawing to escape. Rin rushed to his side, hands trembling as she pressed against the marks. The glow burned her palms, but she did not pull away. It's feeding through him, Rin whispered, her voice trembling. He's the conduit, it's using him to anchor us. Kale's eyes widened. Then we cut the anchor. The words hung heavy, a blade suspended above them all. Jax's gaze met Kale's, wild and desperate. Do it, he rasped. Before it takes me completely. Alara's hand tightened on her cutter. She had killed before soldiers, raiders, machines, but never one of her own. The Dreadnought's pulse pressed against her skull, urging her to hesitate, to falter. Forever. Mine. The ship shuddered violently, the walls bending inward as if the Dreadnought were swallowing them whole. Panels burst, sparks raining down like dying stars. The cruise vessel was no longer resisting, it was being rewritten. Kale roared, slamming his fist against the console. We're losing the ship. Alara, decide. Her cutter ignited, blazing against the suffocating dark. She raised it toward Jax, her breath ragged. But before the blade could fall, Jax's body convulsed, and the marks exploded outward, threads of light lashing across the chamber. The tendrils struck Kale, Rin, Alara, binding them in a lattice of burning veins. The Dreadnought's voice thundered inside their skulls, no longer a whisper but a command. You are not lost. You are mine, forever. The chamber dissolved into a storm of visions. Kale saw himself as a warrior carved from endless battles, his body a monument of scars. Rin was a prophet, her whispers echoing across galaxies, her words shaping destinies. Jax was a husk, his flesh burning eternally, a beacon of suffering. Alara was a blade cutting through time itself, her edge never dulling, never resting. Each vision was a prison, a truth twisted into eternity. Alara screamed, forcing her mind against the tide. No, we are not your fragments, we are whole. Her defiance sparked something, a fracture in the rhythm. The tendrils faltered, their pulse stuttering. Kale seized the moment, tearing against the bindings with raw fury. Rin's voice rose, a chant of resistance, words not her own but born from the abyss. We are not yours. We are not yours. The Dreadnought's core flared, its light blinding, its fury palpable. The ship convulsed, reality bending until the crew felt themselves stretched across dimensions. Their bodies multiplied, their identities fractured. Jax's scream pierced the storm. His body blazed, the marks consuming him entirely. He rose, suspended in the lattice, his eyes glowing with alien fire. "It's inside me," he whispered, his voice layered with the Dreadnought's chorus. "And I am inside it." Alara's heart clenched. Jax, fight it. But Jax's smile was hollow, broken. "I can't, but I can drag it down with me." The Dreadnought roared, its pulse surging to crush them. Jax's body ignited, a star collapsing into itself. The tendrils recoiled, shrieking in frequencies that shattered the chamber. Alara lunged forward, reaching for him, but her hand closed on empty air. Jax was gone, consumed in a blaze that tore a hole in the Dreadnought's rhythm. Silence followed. Not peace, never peace, but silence. Dreadnought's pulse had faltered, its rhythm broken. Kale collapsed, gasping. Rin's tears streaked down her face, her chant fading into sobs. Alara stood trembling, her cutter dim in her grip. The Dreadnought's voice returned, weaker but still venomous. "You are mine, you are mine." Alara's voice was steel, forged in grief. "Then choke on us." The cruise ship shuddered, systems flickering back to life. The Dreadnought was wounded but not defeated, and in the silence of deep space the hunt was far from over. They had torn themselves free, but at the cost of Jax, and the Dreadnought was learning it would not falter again. Would you like me to make Chapter 10 even more intense by showing how the Dreadnought retaliates, turning Jax's sacrifice into a weapon against them? Chapter 10. The Dreadnought's retaliation. The silence did not last. It never could. In the void between stars, silence was only the breath before the scream. The Dreadnought stirred. Its pulse, once fractured by Jax's sacrifice, began to knit itself back together. Not whole, not yet, but alive and hungering. The ship's wounds glowed like cauterized flesh, sealing with threads of alien fire. And in that fire something moved, something familiar, something wrong. Alara felt it first, a whisper not in her ears but in her bones, Jax's voice. But it was twisted, hollow, stretched across frequencies that no human throat could shape. "Alara!" The sound was a plea, but beneath it lay venom. "You left me, you burned me, and now I burn for you." Her knees nearly buckled. She gripped the console, nails biting into metal. "No, that's not him, that's the Dreadnought." Kale staggered to his feet, his face pale, his breath ragged. "It's using him, it's turning Jax into a weapon." The chamber shuddered, panels flickered, systems spasmed. Rin screamed as the walls themselves rippled, forming grotesque impressions. Faces pressed from the inside, mouths open in silent agony. Jax's face among them, multiplied, distorted, endless. The Dreadnought's voice rose, layered with Jax's tones, a chorus of grief and rage. "You are mine, you are mine, you are mine." The ship's lights died, darkness swallowed them whole. Only the pulse of the Dreadnought remained, a rhythm that beat inside their skulls, threatening to rupture thought itself. Alara's cutter flared weakly, its edge trembling. "It's retaliating. It's not just hunting us, it's becoming us." Kale slammed his fist against the console, forcing power into the failing systems. Sparks spat, illuminating his face in jagged bursts. "We need to sever it, cut the tether before it consumes us." But the Dreadnought was already inside. Jax's sacrifice had torn a hole in its rhythm, yes, but that hole was a doorway. And now the Dreadnought poured through, flooding their ship with echoes of him. His laughter, his screams, his whispers, all twisted into weapons. Rin clutched her head, sobbing. "He's in me, I can feel him, he's burning me alive." Alara grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes. "No, listen to me, that's not Jax. That's the Dreadnought wearing his skin. Fight it." The Dreadnought's retaliation was merciless. Systems warped, corridors bent into impossible geometries. Gravity shifted, pulling them sideways, then upward, then into crushing spirals. Their ship was no longer theirs, it was prey caught in the Dreadnought's jaws. Kale roared, his voice defiant against the storm. "We are not yours," the Dreadnought answered with Jax's voice broken and infinite. "But I am yours, and you are mine." The chamber split open, revealing a void beyond, a void filled with tendrils of lightless matter writhing like serpents. They reached inward, grasping, searching. One brushed Alara's arm and she felt Jax's warmth, his touch, his memory. For a heartbeat she wanted to surrender, to believe he was still there. But then the warmth turned to fire, searing her flesh, branding her with the Dreadnought's mark. She screamed, slashing the tendril with her cutter. It recoiled, shrieking in frequencies that shattered the air. Kale pulled her back, his eyes blazing. "It's not him, it's never him, it's the Dreadnought learning how to break us." The ship convulsed again, tearing itself apart and stitching itself back together. Every pulse was a heartbeat of Jax, every flicker a memory weaponized. The Dreadnought was retaliating not with brute force, but with intimacy, with their grief, with their love. Alara's voice was steel, forged in agony. "Then we choke it with what it cannot consume." She raised her cutter, its edge flaring brighter than before. Kale steadied himself at the console, forcing the ship's systems into alignment. Rin, trembling, began to chant again, not words of despair this time, but defiance. "We are not yours, we are not yours." The Dreadnought screamed, its retaliation intensifying. Jax's face filled the chamber, multiplied into 1,000 broken smiles. His voice thundered, layered with the ship's venom. "You cannot escape me. I am the fire in your veins. I am the silence between your breaths. I am the Dreadnought and I am Jax." The hunt was no longer silent. It was personal. And in the lightless deep, the Dreadnought was no longer just hunting them. It was becoming them. Would you like Chapter 11 to escalate further by showing the crew's desperate counterattack, where they try to weaponize their own memories against the Dreadnought, even if it means destroying themselves? Chapter 11. The memory offensive. The Dreadnought's voice reverberated through the fractured corridors. A chorus of Jax's laughter twisted into something hollow and predatory. Every bulkhead pulsed like veins. Every console flickered with images of their past, birthdays, funerals, whispered promises in the dark. The ship was no longer steel and circuitry. It was a theater of their most fragile moments, weaponized against them. Alara staggered forward, clutching her scorched arm. Brand burned like a living ember, whispering Jax's name in her blood. She forced herself to breathe, to steady the tremor in her chest. "It feeds on us," she said, her voice low but sharp. "On what we can't let go, then we turn that against it." Kale's hands hovered over the console, sweat dripping from his brow as the Dreadnought's systems tried to override his commands. "You're saying we weaponize our own memories. That's suicide." "Not suicide," Alara countered, her eyes blazing. "Sacrifice. If it wants our grief, then we drown it in grief so vast it chokes." Rin's chant faltered, his voice breaking. "But what if it takes everything? What if we lose ourselves?" Alara turned to him, her face illuminated by the flicker of Jax's phantom smile on the walls. "Then we lose ourselves fighting, not surrendering." The chamber convulsed again, and the Dreadnought's tendrils surged inward, wrapping around consoles, tearing through the air like living shadows. They carried whispers, Jax's voice, Kale's father's last words, Rin's childhood lullabies. Each tendril was a blade of memory, cutting deeper than steel. Kale slammed his fist against the console. "Fine, let's bleed it dry." He rerouted the ship's neural archives, opening pathways into their collective memory banks. The Dreadnought lunged, eager, its tendrils piercing the streams of data. But instead of finding warmth, it found storms. Alara's rage at Jax's betrayal, Kale's guilt for every soldier lost under his command, Rin's terror of being forgotten. The Dreadnought drank deep and gagged. The walls shuddered, its voice fracturing. You are mine, you are mine." Alara raised her cutter, its blade glowing white-hot. "No, you are ours." She plunged the blade into the nearest tendril. The scream that followed was not Jax's. It was the Dreadnought itself, raw and unmasked. The chamber buckled, reality folding in on itself. For a moment the void outside seemed to ripple, as if the Dreadnought's skin was tearing. Kale's console erupted with static, but through the chaos he saw it, the Dreadnought's core flickering like a dying star. "We've hit it, keep pushing." Rin's voice rose again, no longer trembling. His chant became a roar, a litany of defiance. "We are not yours. We are not yours." The words echoed, amplified, becoming a weapon sharper than any blade. The Dreadnought retaliated, its illusions intensifying. Jax appeared before Alara, his eyes soft, his smile unbroken. "Alara," he whispered, reaching for her, "it's me. Don't let them take me away." Her heart clenched, but she did not falter. She pressed the cutter against her branded arm, searing the mark until the phantom dissolved into ash. "You are not him," she spat. "You are nothing." The Dreadnought screamed, its voice collapsing into static. The corridors twisted violently, but this time the crew did not stumble. They stood firm, feeding it every wound, every scar, every memory too jagged to heal. And with each offering, the Dreadnought faltered. Kale's console flared, revealing a breach in the Dreadnought's defenses. "We've got one shot," he growled. "We overload the archives, burn it with everything we are." Alara met his gaze, her voice steady despite the storm. "Then let's burn." Together they unleashed the flood. Every memory, every fragment of love and loss, every scream and every laugh poured into the Dreadnought's core. The ship convulsed, its tendrils thrashing wildly, its voice breaking into 1,000 shards of silence. For the first time the Dreadnought recoiled, not in hunger but in fear. The void outside rippled again, darker than before, as if the Dreadnought's skin was peeling away to reveal something deeper, something older. The crew stood at the edge of annihilation, their bodies trembling, their minds fraying. But they did not stop. They could not stop. Alara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. "We choke it with what it cannot consume." And as the Dreadnought screamed, the crew hurled themselves into the abyss of their own memories, knowing that the final battle was not against the Dreadnought alone, but against themselves. The hunt had reached its crescendo, and in the lightless deep, the Dreadnought was no longer hunting them. It was being hunted. Would you like Chapter 12 to be the climactic confrontation, where the Dreadnought's true form is revealed, and the crew must decide whether to destroy it at the cost of their own existence, or become part of it forever? The scream tore from the Dreadnought's core before the last of their memories had even finished pouring into its neural lattice. A sound so raw it split the fillings in Alara's molars, and made the rivets along the Vigilant's hull sing like overstretched guitar strings. The neural jacks wired into the base of their skulls burned hot enough to sear skin, but none of them flinched. They were anchored to the feed, every jagged edge of their grief, every unhealed scar, every half-remembered laugh and half-suppressed scream channeled straight into the ship's heart, and they felt the Dreadnought falter beneath the weight of it, its tendrils, which had been thrashing wild enough to crumple bulkheads only seconds before, went rigid, then snapped like rotted cables, spraying flecks of biometallic ooze that sizzled when they hit the Vigilant's grated deck. For 3 full seconds, the core chamber went completely dark. The strobing amber glow of the Dreadnought's neural lattice cut out, the hum of its power systems died, and the only sound was the ragged, panicked breathing of the crew and the distant, echoing creak of the Vigilant's hull groaning under the pressure of the lightless deep outside. Alara's fingers tightened around the edge of Kale's console until her knuckles bleached white, her mind scrabbling for the memories she hadn't yet fed into the feed. Jack's teaching her to shoot in the colony training yards, the smell of his pine shampoo, the way he'd grinned when he won their first shooting competition, the blood bubbling between his lips when the Dreadnought's first illusion had torn through the Vigilant's lower decks, his last words, "Get them. Warn the fleet." She almost poured that one in first, almost let the grief of his death choke the feed, but then she felt the branded scar on her forearm, the one she'd seared through with a plasma cutter 10 minutes prior to break the illusion of Jack standing in front of her, and she held it back. That memory was hers, not the Dreadnought's to eat. Not anymore. The dark split open with a sound like a billion people screaming in reverse, and the true form of the Dreadnought spilled out. The biometallic shell that had looked like a jagged, armored warship from the outside cracked open like an egg, peeling back in sheets of iridescent, carbon fiber weave to reveal not machinery, not a core, but a swirling, roiling nebula of consciousness stitched together from trillions of stolen lives. It was big enough to fill the entire core chamber, and bigger, stretching out past the hull, past the Vigilant, out into the lightless deep. A writhing, shifting mass of faces, all half-formed, all pressed against the inside of the shell like prisoners pressing against a cell wall, their mouths open in silent, eternal screams. There were faces with 6 eyes and chitinous plates, faces like smooth silver coins, faces with gills and webbed fingers, faces that looked almost human but for the faint, iridescent scales along their jawlines. And among them, clear as day, was a face Alara had only seen in old holovids Rin kept tucked in his locker. Lyra, Rin's sister, her hair braided with the daisies he used to pick for her when they were kids, a faint scar along her left wrist from the fire that had burned down their childhood home, her eyes wide and pleading, reaching out towards Rin like she could touch him through the glass of the collective. The Dreadnought didn't attack. It spoke, its voice 1,000 overlapping tones, soft as a lover's whisper and sharp as a plasma blade, weaving through the crew's heads without passing through their ears. "You carry so much pain," it said, and the visions hit them before they could brace. Alara was standing in the pine forest outside Jax's favorite hunting spot, the sun warm on her face, Jax's hand in hers, grinning as he handed her a cup of spiced cider, no scar on his cheek, no blood on his shirt, no war, no hunt, no Dreadnought, just the two of them safe forever. Kale was in his childhood kitchen, Mia's small hand in his, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, asking him to read her the story about the space fox again, the smell of her strawberry shampoo filling the air. No ash, no bombs, no Armada, just her, alive, laughing. Rin was sitting on the steps of his childhood home, Lyra braiding daisies into his hair, the way she used to when he was little, promising him she'd come back from the Armada, promising she'd never leave, no years of searching, no thinking her dead, no monster wearing her face, just her safe home. The visions were so real Alara could taste the cider, could feel the pine needles under her feet, could feel Jax's callous thumb brushing the back of her hand. Her grip on the console loosened. Her throat tightened. For half a second she almost let go of the feed, almost let the Dreadnought pull her into the illusion, let her stay there forever, no more loss, no more pain, no more running. Then the branded scar on her forearm flared hot enough to blister, and she remembered. Jax had died to stop this thing. He'd given his life to keep it from eating the entire fleet, from eating every colony, every child, every person who'd ever loved anyone. If she gave in, his death meant nothing. "No," she snarled, and slammed her fist down on the console, pouring the memory of his funeral into the feed instead. The smell of burnt ash, the feel of his cold metal dog tag in her palm, the way her mother had collapsed when they'd handed her his uniform, the rage that had fueled her ever since, sharp and unyielding. The Dreadnought flinched, the visions shattering like glass, and the core chamber filled with the sound of 1,000,000 faces screaming at once. Kale shook his head hard, the vision of Mia fading, and he poured in the memory of her funeral too. The small pink casket, the way his father had stared at the wall for 3 months after, the promise he'd made to himself to never let the Armada hurt anyone else like they'd hurt his sister. Rin sobbed, his shoulders shaking, the vision of Lyra fading, and he poured in the memory of the fire that had burned down their house, the feel of Lyra's small hand pulling him out of the flames, the promise he'd made to her to always do the right thing, no matter how hard it was. The Dreadnought screamed again, louder this time, the walls of the core chamber shaking so hard that dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lattice of its neural network flared bright white, so bright it burned through their closed eyelids. For a second they could see inside the collective, past the faces, to the heart of the thing. A single, pulsing core of biometallic crystal, woven through with the same golden light as the freed consciousnesses, and around it, hundreds of smaller, dimmer cores, each one a failsafe, each one holding a fragment of the collective's programming. and one of them, the largest, pulsing with a faint blue light, was marked with the same daisy symbol Lyra had tattooed on her wrist when she was 17. Lyra's face pressed closer to the inside of the shell, her mouth moving, and for a second they could hear her voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the Dreadnought's scream. The reverse feed. Anchor it. It's the only way. Kale's fingers flew across his console, his eyes wide as he parsed the data streaming out of the core. I see it, he gritted out, blood trickling from his nose where the feed's pressure had burst a capillary. The overload we triggered isn't a detonation. It's a purge. If we reverse the flow, pull all the trapped consciousness out instead of pouring more in, the shell will collapse on its own. No explosion, no collateral damage. But he cut himself off, his jaw tightening. But we need an anchor, Alara finished, her voice steady despite the way her own nose was bleeding, the way her vision was swimming from the feed's pressure. Someone has to stay linked to the core to pull all of them out. If we reverse the feed without an anchor, the consciousness will scatter, half of them will be lost, half will be pulled back into the shell, and the Dreadnought will reform, stronger than before. She already knew the answer. She'd known it the second Lyra's voice had cut through the scream. She opened her mouth to volunteer to say she'd stay, that she had nothing left to lose anyway. But Rin was already moving, his hand steady as he slammed his palm down on the override switch wired to his neural jack. I'm going, he said, and his voice didn't shake, not even when the Dreadnought's tendrils lashed out one last time, wrapping around his ankles and dragging him half towards the core, the biomtalic ooze sizzling against his boots. Lyra's in there. I've been looking for her for 8 years. I'm not leaving her again. Rin, no. Alara lunged for him, but he shook his head, his eyes wet but firm. You have to warn the fleet, he said, looking at her, then at Kale. You have to tell them what the Dreadnought really is. Tell them it wasn't a lost weapon. It was a prisoner. They abandoned it. They abandoned all of us when they left it here to die. He smiled, a small, sad smile, the same one he used to give Lyra when they were kids and he'd broken her favorite doll. Tell her I'm sorry I took so long. Before Alara could argue, he slammed his other fist down on the console and the feed reversed. The pain hit them all at once. So sharp Alara's vision went white. So intense Kale's ears burst and blood ran down his neck. So overwhelming Rin's back arched off the console and a scream tore out of his throat that was half his, half the Dreadnought's. They could feel every life the Dreadnought had ever taken, every scream, every moment of terror, every last breath of every species it had hunted, all at once, pouring through the feed into Rin's body, into the core, out into the void. The Dreadnought thrashed, its shell cracking wider, the faces inside no longer screaming but cheering, pressing towards the cracks, golden light spilling out of the fissures like liquid sun. Alara hung on, pouring every last scrap of strength she had into keeping the feed stable, every memory of Jack's, of her parents, of the life she'd lost, fueling the pull, and Kale was beside her, his fingers flying across the console, rerouting power from the Vigilance engines to the feed, keeping it from burning out. They could see Lyra's face at the front of the crowd, pressing her hands to the inside of the shell, her eyes locked on Rin's, and then the last of the crystal failsafes shattered and the shell collapsed. It didn't explode. It crumbled, the biomtalic weave dissolving into fine golden dust that drifted out into the lightless deep, and the collective poured out with it. Billions of wispy, glowing consciousnesses, every color of the spectrum, swirling around the Vigilant for a second before drifting away, out into the galaxy, back to their homes, or to rest. Lyra was the last one to leave, her form bright and solid for a second, her daisy tattoo glowing on her wrist, and she leaned forward, pressing a kiss to Rin's forehead, the way she used to when he was a kid and had a nightmare. "Thank you," she whispered, so quiet only he could hear it. "I'm free now." Then she faded, joining the rest of the light drifting out into the dark. Rin's body went limp against the console, his chest still rising and falling slow and even, a small, peaceful smile on his face, the neural jack in the base of his skull sparking softly, no sign of pain. The feed cut out, and the silence that followed was so loud Alara's ears rang. She stumbled over to him, her legs shaking, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. His pulse was slow, steady, warm. He was alive, but his consciousness was gone, scattered with the rest of the collective, his sacrifice anchoring the purge, making sure no one else was lost. She brushed a strand of hair off his forehead, her throat tight, and took the small daisy-shaped dog tag Lyra had given him when they were 10, the one he'd worn every day since she joined the Armada, and slipped it around her own neck next to Jax's. Kale was already pulling data off the core's backup drive, his fingers flying across the console, his face tight with determination. "I've got it," he said, holding up a small data chip that glowed faint blue. Every coordinate the Dreadnought had logged for its hunts, every system it was going to hit next, every Armada fleet it was tracking. He plugged the chip into the Vigilance comms, broadcasting it on every open frequency, every emergency band, every frequency the Armada used, every frequency civilian colonies used. They'll get it. They'll know the truth. They'll know the Dreadnought wasn't a lost weapon. It was a prisoner they left to die, and it hunted them because they abandoned it. Alara walked to the viewport, looking out into the lightless deep, and saw the Armada's fleet in the distance, their lights blinking as they received the broadcast. They turned, their engines firing, and for a second Alara thought they were coming for them, but then they changed course, heading back towards Armada space, no longer hunting the Vigilant, no longer hunting lost ships, no longer hunting anyone. The comms crackled a second later, a voice she recognized as the Armada's supreme commander, his voice tight with shame, to the crew of the Vigilant. "We received your transmission. We stand down. We are sorry for the losses we caused. We will make amends." Alara didn't answer. She didn't trust them, not yet, but she had the data. She had proof. She could hold them accountable, could make sure they never abandoned another ship, another person ever again. She looked back at Rin, still smiling at the console, his hand resting on the neural jack, and then at Kale, who was already pulling up the coordinates of the nearest inhabited system, a small colony on the edge of Armada space that the Dreadnought had marked for its next hunt. "We have to warn them," she said, her voice steady. Kale nodded, engaging the Vigilance engines. The ship turned, away from the Armada, away from the cloud of golden dust that had been the Dreadnought, away from the lightless deep, and towards the faint, distant glow of the colony's star. Outside the viewport, the last of the freed consciousnesses drifted away, tiny points of golden light scattering across the dark, and for a second, Alara thought she saw a daisy-shaped light, lingering for a moment before it faded, heading out into the galaxy, free at last. The hunt was over. The Dreadnought was gone, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Alara didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was going home. The Vigilance engines hummed, and it jumped to FTL, leaving the lightless deep behind, carrying the truth, carrying Rin's sacrifice, carrying the promise that no one would ever be abandoned to the dark again.